The sun was sharp that afternoon, and the air felt heavy. A young disabled girl sat outside her small home, watching the world pass by. She lived a quiet life, often unnoticed by others. Her body moved slower than most, and every step she took was a struggle. But inside her, there was a heart that beat with kindness. She never allowed her own pain to stop her from caring for others. That day, as she sat under the shade of a tree, she heard the deep growl of a motorcycle rolling down her street. It was a sound her neighbors often feared. They would whisper about men on bikes, warning each other to stay away. The bike slowed near her gate. A tall man with tattoos and a leather jacket stepped down. His face was hidden behind dark glasses, but the girl noticed how tired he looked. His skin was dry, his throat clearly thirsty. He stood there for a moment, unsure whether to knock or just ride away. Most people closed doors when they saw him, and he was used to that. But the girl's eyes met his, and instead of fear, she showed concern. Slowly, with effort, she pushed herself up and went inside. A moment later, she returned, holding a simple glass of water with both hands. She was nervous but determined. Her steps were uneven, but her smile was steady. She lifted the glass toward him and said softly, "Here, you look like you need this." The biker froze. For years, he had seen people avoid him. No one offered him kindness, only suspicion. Yet here stood a fragile young girl, struggling with her own condition, still choosing to think of him before herself. He took the glass, his rough fingers brushing against her smaller hands. The water wasn't much, but in that instant it felt like the most precious gift he had received in a long time. He swallowed slowly, his throat cooling as he looked at her. For the first time in a while, he felt seen, not as a biker, not as a stranger, but as a human being. He managed a small smile and whispered, "Thank you." She only nodded and returned to her chair, not realizing what she had just done. The man placed the glass back carefully, started his motorcycle, and rode away. But in his heart, something had shifted. He knew he could never forget the girl who gave him water on a hot summer day. That night, the biker rode for miles, the sound of his engine filling the empty roads. But his mind was somewhere else. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl with the uneven steps and the steady smile. He had met countless people in his life, at bars, on highways, at rallies, but none of them had looked at him the way she did. There had been no fear in her eyes, no judgment, only a quiet concern that pierced through the hard shell he had built around himself. When he reached the place where he and his brothers usually gathered, the smell of fuel and smoke filled the air. Dozens of bikes were parked in a row, chrome shining under the night sky. The men laughed, argued, and told stories, their voices rough and loud. Normally, he would join them, but this time he stayed quiet, lost in thought. His closest brother noticed and asked what was wrong. At first, he didn't answer. How could he explain that the smallest act, a glass of water, had unsettled him so deeply? Finally, he spoke. "Today, someone reminded me that kindness still exists." His voice carried a weight the others weren't used to hearing. Slowly, he told them about the girl. He didn't even know her name. He only described how she moved, how she struggled, but still came out holding that glass as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The room fell silent. These were men who had been called outcasts, troublemakers, dangers to society. Many of them hadn't felt compassion from strangers in years. Yet, the story struck a chord in each of them. One man muttered, "She saw him." Really saw him. Another shook his head and said, "Not many would do that." Not for us. The group, known for their toughness, suddenly sat in silence, each man remembering moments when life had been cruel to them. For the first time in a long while, they weren't talking about fights or rides, they were talking about a girl they had never met. The biker leaned back, staring at the fire burning in the oil drum beside them. He didn't say it aloud, but he felt something stir inside, a need to return, a need to show her that her small act had not been wasted. He didn't know how, but he was sure of one thing: this girl had changed something in him. The story of the disabled girl spread faster among the bikers than the roar of their engines. Each time it was retold, the details grew sharper: the way she struggled to carry the glass, the courage in her eyes, the way she treated their brother like he mattered. For men who had spent most of their lives being judged by leather jackets, loud bikes, and scarred knuckles. It felt almost unreal. A simple act had touched the hardest of hearts. One evening, under the dim light of a flickering street lamp, the biker who first met her sat with his brothers again. The air smelled of gasoline and dust, the kind of air they had grown used to. This time, though, their conversations turned serious. "We ride together," one of them said. "We fight together. But when was the last time someone outside treated us like family?" No one answered. The silence spoke for itself. That's when the thought became a plan. What if they showed her what brotherhood truly meant? What if they gave back what she had given respect, but multiplied 100 times? At first, some of the older riders laughed. A bunch of bikers rolling into her street? "You'll scare her family half to death," one said, shaking his head. But the leader raised his hand and replied, "No, we won't scare them. We'll show them who we are. She gave water to one of us, and now she's one of us. We protect our own." The men nodded, slowly at first, then with conviction. They weren't plotting chaos or rebellion. They were planning gratitude. Deep down, each rider knew the world rarely saw them as anything but dangerous. This time, they wanted to flip that story. They wanted the girl to know she wasn't invisible, that her kindness had created a bond. In the following days, messages spread across chapters. Phone calls were made, and engines roared across states. What started as one man's experience turned into a mission shared by hundreds. The sound of loyalty was being prepared on highways and in garages, with every rider tuning his machine for a ride that would not be forgotten. The girl, meanwhile, carried on with her daily struggles, unaware of what was building. To her, it had been just a glass of water. To them, it had been a reminder that even in a world that judged them, humanity was still alive. And soon, she would see what that meant when 250 motorcycles rolled as one. The morning began like any other. The girl sat quietly on the porch, her crutches resting beside her, watching the birds hop across the dusty road. She had no idea that far beyond the horizon, hundreds of engines had already started their journey toward her. The sun rose higher, and soon the quiet of the neighborhood was broken by a sound she had never heard before, a low, deep rumble that grew stronger with every passing second. At first, she thought it was a storm rolling in. The windows rattled, the ground seemed to hum, and even the leaves trembled on the trees. Her neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering nervously. One man muttered, "Something's coming." "And it's big." The sound became a roar, unmistakable, powerful, like thunder made of steel. Then they appeared, a long line of motorcycles, gleaming chrome and leather, rolling into the street like an unstoppable river. Dozens, then hundreds. The girl blinked, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks. The roar filled the whole neighborhood, until her small street seemed to narrow for the sea of engines. Her parents rushed out, startled. Fear flashed across their faces as they saw men with tattoos, bandanas, and leather jackets lining up outside their home. Mothers pulled their children indoors, and doors slammed shut up and down the road. To outsiders, it looked like a gang invasion. But then something unexpected happened. The bikers cut their engines, one after another, until silence settled heavy over the street. Instead of anger, there was calm. Instead of violence, there was order. The girl held her breath as the first biker, the same man she had offered water to, stepped forward. He removed his helmet, walked slowly to the porch, and in his hand was not a weapon, but a bouquet of fresh flowers. Behind him, others dismounted and stood in respectful silence, some carrying small gifts, others simply bowing their heads. The man placed the flowers gently on her lap and said in a voice that carried to everyone watching, "That day, you gave me water when no one else would. Today, we are here to tell you you are not alone." Her eyes widened, and her lips trembled. The whole street had stopped moving. Even her parents, frozen with fear just moments before, now stared in disbelief. What had looked like a gathering of danger had turned into the most powerful act of gratitude the neighborhood had ever seen. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes as she looked at the flowers resting on her lap. For so long, she had felt small, fragile, and unseen. Yet here she was, with her quiet street filled by hundreds of men who had come not to frighten her, but to honor her. The bikers stood shoulder to shoulder, their jackets bearing patches of loyalty and brotherhood. their eyes steady with respect. The leader stepped forward, his voice low but firm, carrying across the silent crowd. "You gave one of us a glass of water. You treated him like a human being when the world turned its back. That makes you family now. And family, we protect." The girl's parents exchanged stunned glances, unsure how to respond. They had feared judgment from neighbors their entire lives, worried people would pity their daughter or dismiss her worth. Now, in a single morning, that fear was drowned out by the sound of engines and the sight of men vowing to stand with her. One by one, the bikers came closer, not rushing, but moving gently, respectfully. Some placed small tokens at her feet, a bandana, a patch, a hand-carved piece of wood. These were not just objects. They were symbols of trust, things usually kept within the circle of their brotherhood. To give them to her meant she was no longer an outsider. She was theirs. The neighbors who had once hidden behind curtains began to step outside, their fear melting into awe. Children pointed at the rows of motorcycles, and mothers whispered in disbelief. The same men who had been labeled as dangerous were now standing like guardians around a fragile girl's home. For the first time, the world saw them not as shadows on the road, but as protectors of kindness. The girl pressed her hand to her chest, her voice barely a whisper. "I only gave water." The biker who had first met her knelt beside her and replied gently. And that was enough to change everything. From that day on, she was no longer just the disabled girl at the corner house. She was the girl the Hell's Angels called sister. The roar of engines that once made her neighbors afraid now carried a new meaning: loyalty, protection, and respect. And though she had never asked for it, she gained something priceless, a family she never knew she had. All because she chose kindness on a hot summer afternoon.